Hey, it's the What If Podcast. I'm Spencer, and that's Rob Kristoffersen. What's going on, man?
Not much, dude. What's happening over in Minnesota?
Oh boy, it's cold and rainy today. We got our first full-on fall-ass day today. It's been kind of nice.
That sounds kind of nice. Sounds pretty great. I'm waiting for the full fall to show up here. We kind of got a little taste of it like last week. You know, it was in the mid to upper 60s. It was pretty nice. And then we got hit with the 75 today, which is it's okay. That's manageable. But I'm ready for fall. I'm over summer. I'm over 2020. So
Yeah, dog. Let's just keep the days going. Get this
momentum.
Get this whole life thing out of the way real quick.
I'm all about making it quick, man. You know, when it comes to this year ending, I'm really there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for hanging out today, man. It's good to see you.
No, I appreciate it, dude. It's always great to record with you. It's always a good time, always good laughs, and it's definitely an honor to be here on the main show. I've been. I do the Uncle Rob's Alien Story Times, bust those out every now and then, and show up. I've shown up on the Patreon a couple times, so it's definitely great to be here.
For sure, man. You want to talk about some UFOs?
Yeah, dude. That's my thing. That's my thing. People may have thought I completely retired from it. I only mostly retired from it. You know, I come out when the big dogs give me shoot me a message, and I'm like, yeah, dog, I'm there for you.
How's post-retirement life treating you? I mean, you still have another podcast, but how's post UFO podcast life going?
It's a lot less stressful. Less stressful.
Hell yeah, that's what we're going for.
2020 de-stress. I know we're all going to therapy, but definitely de-stressing is part of that.
Oh, absolutely. If you're not having fun, what are you doing? Don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. You're being miserable, and nobody has time for that.
Exactly. Okay, so I thought we would talk today about the U.S. UFO flap of 1952.
It's beefy. It's a beefy flap.
Yikes.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like it kind of set the scene for UFO culture in the U.S. for a long time after. Where do you want to start with this? My entry point was really the White House D.C. stuff, but I know that was kind of towards the end of the whole, or sort of in the middle of the whole flap. How far back do you want to go?
Let's before we even get to 52, I think we need to set the stage a little bit for 52, and we got to talk about the downfall of Project Grudge a little bit. So 52 is the turning point for UFOs. Everything kind of it seemed like the study of UFOs, which had been downplayed on Project Grudge, and everybody just tried to sweep it under the rug. Well, on September 10th, 1951, there was an incident at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and there was this radar technician that was just giving a demonstration of their radar tech to a bunch of high-ranking military officials, and the radar catches this object, and it's going faster than a jet. And about 25 minutes later, near Dover Air Force Base in Maryland, there was a pilot who was flying a T-33 jet, was in the air, and he saw this, he called it a dull silver disc-like flying object that was moving in excess of 900 miles an hour. He could see it from his cockpit. And later that day, all this stuff's going on, the military brass saw this as something that was kind of concerning. And it wouldn't be till a couple of days later on the 12th that Air Technical Intelligence Command actually got the report about this Fort Monmouth incident. And it was sent by a guy named Major General Charles Cabell, who was someone. He was kind of linked with Project Grudge. He wasn't really the head, but he was just associated with it. He had been associated with it as far back as Project Sign, and he wanted the report on this thing. Well, these two guys, Lieutenant Jerry Cummings and Lieutenant Colonel N.R. Rosengarten, ended up going to Fort Monmouth, and they gave a 2-hour brief with a bunch of people, including General Cabell, Edward Ruppelt, who is about to become a main player in the Project Blue Book stuff, and a guy that was from an air corporation, the Republic Aircraft Corporation, which a lot of people saw as suspicious. If you read Richard Dolan's UFOs in the National Security State book, he's like, oh, it's signs of MJ-12. It's like, fuck your MJ-12, pal. Like, fuck that shit. Get it out of here. But he, in this briefing, essentially Lieutenant Cummings says, well, sir, you don't like this briefing because we've been told to downplay everything. And that's when Cabell really flew off the deep end, and it was Edward Ruppelt in his book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, who would go on to say, he's like, this meeting was recorded, the recording's never been released, but it got really heated. And at that point, this General Cabell said, I want this project reactivated. It's going to be, full transparency. And he puts Edward Ruppelt in the driver's seat of this program. And from late 1951 all the way until about March of 1952, Edward Ruppelt gets this project up and running. And it wasn't until March that they dubbed this thing Project Blue Book. So I think that's where this whole kind of flap begins. Begins pretty much with the founding of Project Blue Book, and that's
so. Sign was first, correct? And that was 47 to 49.
It's 47 to 48.
48, and then Grudge was 49 until 50, 51.
Yeah, about that. It was pretty much, they pretty much ruled Project Grudge done and over with. They'd given their final report in 1950, but they still kept it on. They still had somebody staffing it, just kind of as, you got a figurehead here. It looks like we're showing the effort. So, yeah, you had Project Grudge limply going along until this incident, and then, in the beginning of 1952, it gets relabeled Project Blue Book by Edward Ruppelt himself. And the reason that he chose that name is because he felt like every single report that came in, it was like they were studying for a test. And, back then in school, you take tests in these old, blue, they look like blue notebooks or whatever. So Project Blue Book, that's where we're at.
And then Blue Book ran until late 60s, right?
Yeah, so about 69 is when it finally shuttered, December of 69.
Was there, and these are all, for people not familiar, it's Air Force investigating UFOs in a official-ish capacity.
Yep.
Was Blue Book succeeded by a similar project?
There, for a long time, you have kind of conspiracy theorists saying, well, they had to have had something. They probably didn't stop studying this at all, and then they finally came out with the ATIP stuff back in 2017, and that was the last officially recognized government study of UFOs until now, where the government's saying, well, okay, now we're going to start to study it. Now we're going to take it a little more seriously, which has kind of been the narrative the last few months, and it's kind of gone under the radar because the world's in hell and nobody really wants to pay attention to UFOs.
There would have been a significant gap, though, between the end of Blue Book and the beginning of ATIP, right? Because that was 20... When did ATIP start up? It was 2010s, wasn't it?
2009. So, yeah, you're talking about 40 years. Yeah, 40-year gap.
It just has always seemed weird to me that like you would have right after World War II, you'd have a 25-year stretch basically where you are constantly have some official investigative arm of the Air Force, and then in 2009 till now-ish. Well, ATIP ended. It was 2009 to what, like 16 or 15?
Something like that, yeah.
And then you're starting up again now. I've just always found it a little hard to believe that for 40 years there would have been nothing happening. It seems more likely to me that we just don't know about it.
Yeah, that's the thing is like even J. Allen Hynek, when he would talk about government UFO studies, he would say, well, Project Blue Book was just the, public face of it, that there had to have been something going on underneath it all. And he's probably not wrong. I mean, Hynek had some interesting cases that he knew about that he couldn't talk about, and some that he talked a little bit about, and stuff like that.
Hynek was involved in Blue Book, at least for a while too, right? Or he took it over towards the end?
He got involved very early in 52, right around the beginning of 52, because Edward Ruppel decided to go back into the Project Sign and the Project Grudge files to see what was there and kind of evaluate them. And one of the cases that caught his eye was the case of Thomas F. Mantell, the Air National Guard pilot who died while pursuing a UFO. He suffered from hypoxia and his plane crashed. And the ruling there was that he was chasing the planet Venus during broad daylight. And,
sure,
he had Hynek, because Hynek was basically the astronomical consultant. He would go in, he would look at, reports of astronomical bodies and say, well, yeah, this person probably saw this planet and did this. He was kind of a debunker. He had a bit of a role during Project Sign, but he didn't have anything to do with Project Grudge, really, because Grudge was just a tight-lipped government downplay of everything that was going on, of every report that they were getting. But he had him reevaluate the Thomas F. Mantell case, and what they came to at the time was that what had happened was he was pursuing a Project Skyhook balloon at the time, which was that program had just become declassified in 52, and they quickly rushed to put that explanation to it, which very well could be what he was pursuing, because Mantell, one of the rumors is that the object that he apparently cited kind of looked like an ice cream cone, so it would kind of fit with that. Also not like the only instance of a UFO witness seeing an object like that, so it's one of those weird things. There was a incident in 1966 with an officer named Dale Spar who pursued a UFO for like 66 miles over county lines from Ohio all the way into Pennsylvania, and he claimed that the object that he saw looked like an ice cream cone, and that UFO ruined his life. He lost his job in the police department, which, you can feel however you want about that, but he did name the UFO Floyd because it did ruin his life. Yeah.
He named it Floyd because it ruined his life, or just like he had to give some name to this thing that had destroyed his career and life. Yeah. And it's so great. Like, there are pictures of him sitting at a bar, like holding up a drawing of this object that he drew himself, and he put Floyd right on it. Oh boy. Skyhook was the weather balloon thing, right? Like the upper atmosphere balloons. It
was a high atmosphere balloon, and it had radio equipment attached to it, and it was basically there to try to detect a Soviet atomic bomb test.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was one of the explanations proposed for Roswell at some point too, right? People have suggested that maybe that's what that was.
Yeah, mogul balloon. Yeah, it's basically the same kind of balloon doing similar kind of things.
Got you. All right. So, yeah, 52 is like right around the start of Project Blue Book.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, there were a shitload of UFOs reported all over the country throughout 52.
There were. Most years you saw kind of like the average for most years was like under 100. And by June of 52, like June itself, there were over 149 reports. So like there's just a gaggle of UFOs just doing their crazy shit in the sky.
Wasn't July? Yeah. So I was reading the, dang it. Anyway, the Project Blue Book reports, it said, so there were 169 reports in all of 1951, and there were 364 through June of 1952, with 148 just in June.
Yep.
And then it said there were also 782 reports in July of 52.
Yeah, which is like a serious ratcheting up. I think before 52, the highest total that they had was during like the 47 flap, because one thing that you note with a lot of these flaps is that they're kind of on a bell curve. So what you'll see is reports start to manifest themselves usually around April, May. They spike June. The high point is July, and then they come back for August and the rest of the year.
Really? That's a trend in UFO flaps?
Yeah. It's it's a pretty common thing. If you look at the graphing of most UFO flaps, that's generally how it goes. But it would make sense. I mean, this is the summer months. People are outside more. They're going to be seeing these things more than they would in the winter and stuff like that. But
sure.
Again, it's kind of like it associates with the seasons of the year, pretty much.
Well, and there's got to be something to, once a few start getting reported, it's got to have a sort of exponential effect on the total number of reports. Especially once they start getting press, I would think.
Mm-hmm. Depends on how much press they were getting, because while 47, these things were huge in the press, after Kenneth Arnold had his sighting, and after the papers basically kind of made him out to be a laughingstock by saying, oh, he saw flying saucers, like the press didn't seem to take it seriously. But there are these like moments in UFO like history in the timeline when they seem to start to take it seriously. So beginning of 47, you see it at the beginning of this flap in 52. And I think, especially because of where this flap, eventually the peak of it, where it went to, I think that definitely played a large part of it. And then they started to really take it seriously again in like 65, because the media was getting to the point where they didn't think the government was telling them the whole truth. So they kind of started to turn on the government at that point. But by and large, the media hasn't totally been there for UFO reports. Like you'll see it in like probably better coverage in smaller papers than bigger papers.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just kind of the trend that it's been.
So in 52, are there any specific cases you want to highlight before we get to the DC stuff?
Yeah, there's one case in particular on July 2nd. There's a guy named Delbert Newhouse. He's a naval aviation photographer. He was on vacation in the Tremonton area of Utah, and he had a 16 millimeter Bell & Howell movie camera with him. And while he was at, I think it was like a rest stop or something like that, he took the camera and he pointed it to the sky, and there was a cluster of objects just hanging out, doing these weird maneuvers. If you go to YouTube, you type in, Tremonton UFO video, you'll see it. It's about a minute long worth of footage, but like there's these white dots in the sky. You know, the camera footage is not that great, but he managed to catch a lot of this. There's one point in particular when you can see this one object that's arcing upward, and he claimed that they look like flying discs at the time. So that's like probably one of the bigger cases that came from 52 before the Washington flap.
Yeah, and with that one specifically, the Air Technical Intelligence Center reviewed the film, and they identified 12 to 16 separate individual objects that he had filmed.
Yep.
And they came to the conclusion that it could not have been weather balloons, clouds, birds, or any other natural objects based on the way they were moving, and it was their opinion that these objects were emitting light rather than reflecting light.
Yeah, absolutely. And later on, when this whole flap eventually leads to the Robertson panel in 1953, when it kind of just makes a hullabaloo in the press and stuff like that. They look at this. There's a panel that spent over 1,000 man hours. You know, they came to the conclusions that you just stated, and then the CIA turns around and says, "Nope, it's birds."
Yeah. There was one from 52 that I wanted, or no, maybe it was 1950. No, 52. Yeah, May 10th of 1952. In South Carolina, there were 4 employees of DuPont who were working on a plant along the Savannah River, and they saw 4 disc-shaped objects that approached from the south and then disappeared to the north. It was about 10:45. About 25 minutes later, they see another one of these objects approach from the northeast and disappear to the southwest. And then 5 minutes after that, at 11:15, they saw one more come from the south and disappear to the north. They said these things were 15 inches in diameter, which is, I think, the smallest UFO I've ever heard of.
Yeah, it's definitely taken the rank for small UFOs. You know, there's a few of them that I've heard. I've read some flying saucer reviews in which there's one case in particular. I think a guy I think he was in Mexico. He was going to bed one night, and his shutters opened, and this tiny UFO came into his room, and it essentially scanned his room while he was trying to sleep. He was terrified, and then it just left.
I mean, it would make sense if we're going with the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Mm-hmm. If you're traveling through space in the way that we travel through space, a smaller object is going to be much easier to travel long distances with.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're trying to be inconspicuous, that's definitely working to your advantage. Of course, it doesn't help when you put lights on them, but that's fine.
I've never understood that part either. These 4 15-inch wide yellow and gold UFOs that they saw, 3 of them were at a fairly high altitude, which makes me wonder how they were able to determine that they were about 15 inches across. But there was the one that came from the northeast flew so low that it had to raise up off the ground to avoid running into these storage tanks that they had. All the objects they saw were moving very fast and made no noise, and generally moved on a straight line, but sort of swayed from side to side as they moved, which was also a description I've not really heard before.
Well, it's so weird because when they talk about, a lot of witnesses talk about these objects, it's hey, this thing's kind of teetering from side to side a little bit in the air. It looks like it's being suspended on a string, but if you're looking at it flying from north to south at high speeds, well, obviously that's not happening. So whatever these objects are, it seems to have they have difficult time kind of like navigating at times, it would seem, and then other times
which makes zero sense.
Yeah. Yeah, especially like you talk about the falling leaf pattern that UFOs make. Like, why? What's the point of that?
Right. Have we ever talked about what you think UFOs are? If we have, I've forgotten.
I don't think we have ever talked about that.
Because I'm at a point, like, the more I look into and read about and hear stories about UFOs, the less any one explanation makes sense to me. Like with the extraterrestrial hypothesis, you're not going to travel, across the galaxy and then not be able to maneuver around Earth or put lights on your ship or crash all the time. Like,
right. Like,
and then what are you here for? Right. Like you'd have to have some reason.
I got into an argument one time with a guy because one of the theories when it comes to Roswell is that the craft was struck by lightning. Like, why would you come here and like not protect your craft against that? It's like, I don't know, dude. They're aliens. How the hell do I know? I'm an Earthling. We didn't totally pick up on that like lightning thing until like I think the 50s. So like let's give the aliens a little bit more credit if that's what they are. But like, yeah, it's the aliens seem to do weird things like crash their damn UFOs. If they're actually crashing their UFOs, like that's the thing too, is we don't really have evidence of that. So there's these kind of ambiguous cases that just live on the periphery, and somehow Roswell kind of got it became like the gold standard, of like, oh, aliens they have to exist because this thing crashed and the government hushed it up.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. And I think, that case has life because people keep coming forward and saying, oh yeah, I was there. I saw the dead bodies and I saw the craft. And like realistically, that case sat dormant for like 30 years waiting for Stanton Friedman to come along and do a radio interview with some guy who told him to go talk to Jesse Marcel. So like, I think that's the weirdest aspect of the whole Roswell thing is how it's reported in the papers. They come back and say, no, it was a weather balloon, and then 30 years of dormancy, and God damn it, Stanton Friedman, rest in peace, you son of a bitch.
A whole ship full of aliens crashed.
Whole ship full of aliens. God damn it.
So let's back up just a bit. Do you think that there are aliens from other planets flying through space in spaceships and coming to Earth?
I think there's some higher form of intelligence that has a way of trying to communicate with us in a way that's relatable. So like, if you look at UFO sightings going back into even the like 1870s and stuff like that, like one of the oldest, probably most credible cases of a UFO sighting is from a guy named John Martin, who was a farmer who lived in Texas. He was hunting one morning, I think it was like November 1878, and he claimed to see an object like speed by him at relatively high altitude. And when it got to the point where it was directly over him, he said it looked like a saucer, which was it's very weird because, yeah, Kenneth Arnold isn't the first guy to ever say like the term saucer when describing one of these objects, but it's relatable because all these people start, like you're talking at this point, like over 50 years later, describing similar things.
Well, I think 1878 would have been 20 years before anybody was flying anything. Right.
If you look at the flaps, the mystery airship flap, you start there.
Yeah.
And then you move on to in the 1930s, there were people that were reporting seeing, or not just seeing, but hearing these mysterious planes that would be flying in weather that planes couldn't handle. Like John Keel wrote this like 4-part article for Flying Saucer Review about all these people that had reported hearing or seeing planes flying in weather they shouldn't be able to handle. So that's an interesting extension of that. It has this linear evolution to the point where you get to the 40s, we're a little more modern, we're in the beginning of the atomic age here, and the UFOs show up and they start looking like discs. They start looking like cigars. They start looking like strange objects that really have no aerodynamic capabilities that I know of that anybody's really designing, except for some dude in the 1930s or whatever. I forget where the heck I heard that story, but there was a guy who allegedly had the patent for a UFO way back in the day. But I think they're definitely, not all of them, a small amount of them are some kind of higher intelligence trying to communicate with people, because it doesn't make sense for lights to be on a craft unless you're trying to communicate with somebody. So if you want to get somebody's attention, well, okay, you got a light on it. It's going to make some movements in the sky to get your attention. Granted, I don't think anybody knows what that means or if it really truly means anything at all, but it's one way of communication. And I've had this theory for a long time that that's what, like, when people talk about seeing gray aliens and being abducted by aliens, one of the common features of this phenomenon is they black out. Well, why? That's kind of weird. You would figure like fight or flight would kick in. Not saying that people couldn't like just faint or something like that, but that seems to be the go-to response. There's, a paralyzing agent in there or something, but it's like it seems like we have this visual cue in us that says we're supposed to act this way when we see something like that. Or at least those witnesses have that. Like, especially like Mike Clellan, the owl guy. Like, you talk about, there's one story from the 90s when he was like sitting in his bed at night reading a book, and he saw a light outside his window, and he got up to go investigate it, and there were like 5 gray aliens approaching his house, or so he says. And instead of like running, trying to hide and find cover, he got into bed and went to sleep. Like, that doesn't seem to make sense to me.
No,
but
that would be about the least reasonable thing to do in that moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what makes this phenomenon interesting to me, is like all the ways that people act strangely when confronted with strangeness, instead of moments that should truly display what human beings should do in a fight or flight situation. Yeah. You're like anchored to the spot, and there's some form of communication, but like, well, in those extreme cases, that's kind of where I aim. Higher intelligence, just trying to communicate.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting when you bring it up, like the whether it be the airships or like the airplanes that shouldn't have been able to fly when people were hearing and seeing them, or saucers, or more modern UFO accounts. The technology is always just like a little bit ahead. It's never something that's completely mind-blowing to us. It's something that is like just barely out of the scope of our reality.
Yeah, I mean,
and same thing with the creatures.
Yeah, completely. And like when people saw the airships, they thought that some inventor was going to come forward and say, I've been working on this, and like this is my invention. This is the wave of the future, and that never happened. And with the planes, like those things are just so weird. But like there always seems to be this kind of progression to the point where you get to the flying saucers and the flying cigars, and that seems to be almost out of our reach because we're still flying planes.
But out of our reach, yes, in terms of like we couldn't physically do it, but not out of our reach in terms of understanding it or like recognizing it for being a flying craft, right? Like, and it's still made out of metal, and it's still a physical, like just even the idea that this higher intelligence that's clearly much, much smarter or more advanced than us would still build a ship to get from one place to another the way that we do or did. Right. And that when you go inside, they still have like control panels and stuff, and there are lights on it, and they, you know, a ramp comes down so that they can get out of it. Like all that kind of stuff has always seemed so human to me, but just like a little bit farther, and it seems to progress as we progress, right? Like, and same thing with when people talk about seeing aliens, it's like, why would it have to be a creature that walks on two legs and has a head and two arms and fingers and toes and eyes and stuff? Like, I think if we were to encounter alien life, it would be just as likely that it would be completely unrecognizable to us.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. I completely agree. I think when you talk about the cases in which the entities observed seem to be completely out of the realm of possibility or like just totally out of left field, nobody talks about those cases. So
I brought that up because I think it supports your point of like it's an attempt to communicate, because if it were presented in a way that was totally foreign to us, we wouldn't engage with it, or we wouldn't be able to.
Right. I also definitely think that us as human beings, when it comes to the reports that even UFO investigators look at and give credibility, the ones that contain the most outrageous UFO or like occupant sightings are just completely ignored. For instance, there's a case from 1954 called I think they called it the Casablanca entities. And there were these kids that it almost sounds like they had some like fever dream or something like that, almost like they were like tripping on something. But they reported seeing, they almost look like kind of our cartoon version of what like a ghost looks like from like you know your childhood, kind of like a Casper thing. Almost, it almost looked like something that had a sheet draped over it that had 4 arms on this damn thing, and it had glowing red eyes. And like, I think the closest that you get to that kind of like, because they're almost like universal monster kind of creatures. It's probably the Flatwoods Monster. And that's only because it just became a cultural landmark for all the weird shit that is associated with West Virginia. And I'll tell you, nobody talks about the Apple Devils in West Virginia from the 60s. And let me tell you, those bastards were stealing. Yeah, Apple Devils. Yeah, that's what they called them, Apple Devils. They were basically like Bigfoot like creatures that would steal apples.
Wow. Just because they enjoyed apples because they're delicious?
I'm assuming so. They probably got some good apples in West Virginia, I'm assuming. I don't know.
And like, yeah, okay, even I guess the cryptid stuff is a little bit different because it's assumed that these are like things that evolved on Earth. But like Bigfoot, so it's just it's a human, but it's bigger and hairier. You know, it's like a 5% variation. Or Mothman, it's like, well, it's a dude and a moth or a bird. You know, like these seem like such small little incremental shifts where it just
There's
just as easily
there's an anthropomorphic element to it.
It could be a sentient mist that came from another dimension, and that would make just as much sense. You know,
right? Well, I mean, like we look at ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution. We are. Yeah, like the cream of the crop. And yeah, we're like as destructive as any species ever, probably the most destructive species of any planet nearby. Unless there were truly people living on Mars and they totally fucked things up. Of course, that could have been us, these dumbass theories they got of people like living on Mars and then coming to Earth. Yeah.
Well, they remote viewed it, bro.
They totally remote viewed it. They were on that Ingo Swann shit before Ingo Swann was.
But yeah, I agree with that. Like if there is a hypothesis that works for me around like the whole UFO and alien thing, it would be that it's an intentional attempt to communicate in a way that we could maybe understand it.
Right. And these things take the form of what we presume to be physical craft. Now, in many cases, they are detected on radar. Like, if it's an advanced intelligence, do I know if somehow it's intelligent enough to make itself detectable on radar, even though it may not be taking up a physical space? Because one of the few, like the least ways explored, or in terms of the ways that witnesses interact with UFOs, very, very, very few of them ever touch them, which is interesting. And I think the ones that do touch them probably were in contact with, like, probably a human-made craft of some kind, like Stefan Michalak up in Falcon Lake. I definitely believe that he was in contact with some type of man-made craft, and that UFO totally farted on him, and it was bullshit.
Well, and then what was it? The Rendlesham Forest one. Didn't one of the guys claim to have touched the craft?
Yeah, Jim Peniston did say that he touched the craft and that it gave him telepathic binary code thoughts.
That's right. But again, like if you want us to engage with something, there has to be some physicality to it, right?
You would think, but not all language is physical.
No, but I'm saying if like you are just trying to get our attention, a physical object is probably the best way to do it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, not just that, an unusual physical object, if you are from somewhere else, it's definitely going to get the attention. And, like, fucking Earth is weird. It's just got so much weird shit. So like it's brimming with, it's overflowing with weird shit, and then you got fucking douchebags with Jinko jeans running through paranormal hotspots, asking people if they heard that, and telling their best friends to go in a room where they think they're going to get scratched by demons. That's what we've come to.
It is weird though, like the types of things that we will either accept or ignore that are like pretty high on the fucking weird scale. Like I had a very minor weird experience the other day where I was outside and there were four of us. We were out on a golf course, and it's a big, wooded area basically. And as we're walking, we heard like a dial tone and like somebody dialing a phone coming from the woods, just like very loudly, which makes no sense.
Very weird.
Yeah. And within like 2 minutes, we had all moved on, because what else are you going to do about it? Right. Like, I'm not going to go wander into the woods and look for a giant telephone.
Right.
But like, I couldn't tell you what happened or what I heard or how it happened.
Or why it's trying to get your attention.
Well, right. And then, okay, so going back to if this is something trying to communicate with us, whether it's from another planet or dimension or however you want to measure that, what? Like, you get our attention, right? Like, they obviously have our attention to a degree. Plenty of people have seen and talked about and researched UFOs. What's the goal?
Right. And that's the toughie. Like, you're talking about something that you don't even like whatever this stuff is when it comes to, like, if you're talking about the Skinwalker Ranch stuff, and if you believe that anything really truly goes on at Skinwalker Ranch, whatever's there seems to be able to study humans better than we can it. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it also doesn't have the means of communication. Like, I think one of the most interesting cases of this was the Coombs family in... they were a family that lived in, I think it was Wales, in the 70s, and they just had a whole bunch of weird fucking shit happen on their property. They had strange electrical disturbances, poltergeist-like activity that occurred in the home. They saw UFOs on their property. They had UFOs chase their car. They saw these weird, what they called 8-foot-tall spacemen. They looked like they were wearing spacesuits, hover around their property, and this like stuff happened to them for most of a year. It makes no fucking sense, but it's
worst.
Like, yeah, like, why are they trying to gauge your reaction? What the fuck is going on?
Right. And then is it a situation where are they even like aware of us and our reactions to things?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
is
exactly.
it done intentionally, or is it just a byproduct of whatever else they're doing?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, with this Washington flap, I think the message was pretty clear when all this shit went down, to the point where, okay, let's make the point that there's something more powerful than any atomic force that you have at your fingertips that can outmaneuver you. And yeah, that's when the message is clear, it usually seems to be sent to the government that your weapons aren't as powerful as you think they are, especially with some of the
that seems like such
Korean
an earthly
sightings.
Concern, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that seems like a very human thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the most disturbing stories to come from this particular time period, because we were in the middle of the Korean War, there were a lot of stories of UFOs coming from the Korean War front. There's this guy, Private First Class Francis P. Wall, stationed in, he was near Chorwon in Korea. And he was, his unit was about to just bombard this village with artillery. And this UFO shows up and starts hovering over this village. Well, Francis goes to his commanding officer, asks for permission to shoot at this object. And he gets the permission. They all start unloading artillery at this thing. And it just starts to light up, like it almost starts flashing, and then it starts making these huge arcs in the air. And it starts shooting these soldiers with beams of light. And it ended up causing like a burning sensation on their skin, and it forced them into like underground bunkers and kind of just like tormented these guys for a couple hours. Yeah, until they had to be trucked out of there because a lot of them couldn't stand or walk on their own or anything like that. And doctors claim that these people had high white blood cell counts. I don't know if this story is true or not. It's kind of like a secondhand source kind of. Well, I think it comes from Leonard Stringfield, who actually talked to Francis P. Wall himself. But there were a lot of stories of UFOs coming from the Korean front. And the U.S. was like pretty vulnerable at this time. We're at the beginning of the Cold War. And the government is kind of going back and forth on whether this is like some psychological warfare test, or there were like a select few in the government that believed that these were actually aliens coming to Earth. But like, this was a very interesting time period that did set the stage for a lot of what came with UFO cases and how they seemed to do their best to defy the government orders that would come later.
Yeah, that Korean one is new to me. Although in I think it was the first season of that Project Blue Book show, I think they did like some version of, or like
they did.
Yeah, okay. But in that one, it was in the States, right? Maybe.
Yeah, it was. It was allegedly the government conducting chemical warfare tests on its own soldiers.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
All right, let's get to the DC stuff before we wrap things up here. Before we get to that, let's take a quick break to talk about BetterHelp. If there's something that interferes with your happiness or is preventing you from achieving your goals, check out BetterHelp. They can assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist who you can connect with in a safe and private online environment. BetterHelp will match you with a licensed professional counselor who you can send messages to at any time and get thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule weekly phone or video sessions with your counselor, all without ever having to leave your house. And BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they make it easy and free to change counselors at any time. They have licensed professional counselors who specialize in depression, anxiety, relationships, stress, LGBT matters, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And anything you share with them is strictly confidential. You can join the over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health by going to betterhelp.com/whatif and getting 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/whatif for 10% off your first month. So in July of 52, when this is sort of peaking or about to peak, July 19th, there are, depending on the report, 7-ish objects that showed up on radar. And they were first spotted by air traffic controllers at Washington National Airport. And then later also showed up on radar at Andrews and Bolling Air Force bases.
Here's a little fun fact. Do you know the name of the guy, the first air traffic controller to spot them? Do you know what his name was? Because I do.
I don't.
His name was Ted Nugent.
Oh, good. Amazing.
It's not that Ted Nugent. It's a different one, but it's still hilarious.
If he was alive, he would have been very young in 52.
Yeah. Oh, he definitely would have. I mean, Ted Nugent, piece of shit, but, whatever.
They were also spotted objects that same night were spotted by multiple pilots, including Captain S.C. Casey Pierman, who was flying Capital Air Flight 807 and saw 6 bright lights streak across the sky that he saw for, I think, just a few seconds each. But they were like bluish white lights, basically, that moved across the sky faster than airplanes could have. He said he saw them for about 5 seconds each. Saw one from the ground before he took off, and then several more after they had taken off. He also said that they appeared to be outside of Earth's atmosphere. I don't exactly know what he means by that. Because to me, then that sounds like a meteor. You're seeing it for a few seconds. It's a streak of light. You think it's coming from outside the atmosphere. But I'm assuming a pilot this guy had 24 years of experience flying at that point would know what a meteor is.
Mm-hmm. So which, is a testament to the investigators who try to say that, or try to pass things off as obvious things that these guys with flying experience are completely fucking dumb and wouldn't know a meteor from a hole in the ground. Yeah.
Right. So we've got pilots seeing it. It's showing up on radar. Radar operators at Andrews Air Force Base said they had 7, quote, good solid targets. And they actually sent out some jets to try and make visual contact. and watched, as soon as they sent out a jet, watched one of the objects, quote, just disappear from the scope when they sent a jet after it. Which again points to me, A, something intelligent, and B, something more advanced than any aircraft that we have, because our aircraft can't just disappear off a radar, especially in the 50s.
Yeah, and something that is somehow monitoring your radio transmissions. Somehow.
Right. An air traffic controller saw 7 objects that moved very rapidly up, down, and horizontally, as well as hovering in one position. And another pilot saw one of these bluish, whitish lights follow him as he was descending until he was about 4 miles away from touching down. And that same object that appeared to be following the plane was substantiated by 2 different radars.
Not just, that actually, they were, a lot of these were substantiated by 3. There was the National, Washington Nationals Airport, Andrews Air Force Base, and Bowling Air Force Base.
Yep.
In I think it was Maryland, was also tracking a lot of these things too.
So on the 19th into the, like, overnight 19th into the 20th, there were all of these sightings, visually, radar, multiple pilots. And then the following week, the same thing happened again, basically. Washington National air traffic controllers saw a dozen unexplained radar hits. Fighter jets were sent up again, and this time fighter jet pilots actually reported seeing bright lights that they were moving fast enough that they weren't able to overtake them. Pilot William Patterson said, quote, "I tried to make contact with the bogies below 1,000 feet. I was at my maximum speed, but I stopped chasing them because I saw no chance of overtaking them." So you've got an Air Force pilot visually chasing an object that his jet can't keep up with. That's also showing up on radar. And it's happening twice within a week. And radar tracked them in airspace, like White House protected airspace. Like, this is happening all over the Capitol.
Right. And I think one of the pilots, William Patterson, he later attested to the fact that on that second weekend when he was one of the F-94 pilots, claimed that, he pretty much caught up with them, locked onto them, and when he went to pursue them, these objects turned around and kind of surrounded his plane. And it's it all depends on if you trust your resources or not. I don't know if it's true or not, but he allegedly contacted Andrews, asked for advice on this thing. Nobody knew what to do, but eventually they broke off and flew away. But it's one of the more sensational accounts that comes from this particular flap.
So this Ruppelt was working with Blue Book at the time and didn't hear about these reports until a couple days after the first round. And only because he was reading about it in the papers.
Which is a weird thing, because people were approaching him, asking him what's the story with these UFOs? He's like, I don't know. I just know about it from reading in the paper. That's the weird thing about this is from the beginning, the Pentagon seemed to be wanting to put this under wraps. And the interesting thing is that at the same time that Ruppelt wants to investigate this stuff, Harry Truman wants an explanation, and he's kind of just Ruppelt's turned down. He's turned away. In fact, he's ordered to go back to Ohio like the same day. He was in Washington, D.C. on July 22nd about his business there was identifying weather balloons at Andrews Air Force Base, not associated with the July 19th, 20th sightings, but from something else. And, he just basically had random people asking him about all of these UFOs that had been seen in Washington. And I do believe that these objects, not as dramatically as like the cartoonists made it out to be, they did fly over the Capitol building and the White House that first weekend. So,
and the explanation eventually was like someone suggested that temperature inversions can cause false radar hits.
Right.
And then
that year
they just sort of ran with that, it sounds like, even though it doesn't explain the majority of what was actually happening.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't explain the visual sightings of these. Most of the time they were orange colored objects. And there was one witness in the first set of sightings that said he saw the lights change from orange to green to white. So that could kind of explain why some people saw different colored objects as opposed to others. But like the government response, first and foremost, is kind of like, it seemed like a Project Grudge kind of downplay. And it also attests to the fact that there are other branches of the military that are interested in this phenomenon one way or another, whether that's interest in like keeping interest itself down in it, or trying to get to the bottom of certain things. Like there was according to let me find it here in my notes. Of course, this information comes from Dr. Bruce Maccabee, so you can kind of like take it with a grain of salt. His wife is a racist, so that's what that is. But according to a book he wrote about the 52 flap, there was a brigadier general named William M. Garland who had written a memo to General John A. Samford. Samford is the guy who is most famously associated with the press conference in 52 talking about UFOs and stuff. Like you can, another YouTube video you can look up, just General John A. Samford UFO. You'll see the whole press conference. But he was trying to like insinuate that we need to get to the bottom of this UFO thing. And there seems to be these factions within the government that are on one side or the other. We got to downplay it versus we got to figure out what it is. And you're kind of seeing that on full display with this 52 flap, because a lot of people, the government's nervous. The government's nervous that this is the Russian government and performing psychological operations in the U.S. and that's bad.
It's not great.
That's real bad.
Yeah, it's not great. No. Well, and I think this sort of set the stage for what we saw or what we've seen since, really, of downplaying it or investigating it only in order to then downplay it.
Right.
And
there are very...
in an attempt to come to a specific conclusion, which is, it's not a big deal.
Right. And there are very few cases after this that kind of held up in Blue Book's eyes, like the Donald Trump case, the Cisco Grove case.
Yeah,
that case was forwarded to Blue Book, and it was completely ignored. Hynek wrote about it in his first book, The UFO Experience, but like there were a lot of cases. I think the only real prominent case that kind of stood on its own ground was the Lonnie Zamora case in '64. Mm-hmm. And that's only because there was physical evidence in that case.
Yeah. Well, and then by 70, they apparently were not even investigating UFOs anymore. We had fully concluded by the end of the 60s that it was just, it's whatever it is, it's fine. It's nothing or it's fine.
I blame Hynek for that. That's really Hynek's fault. That it stems from his fumble with the Dexter Hillsdale sightings in '66, and it's J. Allen Hynek and Gerald Ford that really fucked it up for everybody.
Well, at least we have To the Stars on the case now, right? We should be fine.
Louis Elizondo is out in the field. He's got his hat on.
And they have a drone, goddammit. If you've ever watched their show,
oh, God.
They definitely have a drone.
Hey, have they launched any of those Cube satellites that they said they were going to launch yet?
I doubt it. I highly doubt it. I have the second season of that unidentified show on my DVR. I'm going to watch it one of these days, but I know it's going to piss me off.
I was going to say you're setting yourself up just to be pissed off, but I mean, no. Like that's kind of what you bring to the table.
Exactly. That's my bit. All right. Well, I think we got to leave it there for today. Rob, thank you so much for joining. It's always nice to have someone who knows what the fuck they're talking about on the show. So much appreciated, bud.
I appreciate the opportunity to ramble on like a crazy person.
You're welcome anytime, bud.
Thank you.
All right. Love you, bud. Talk to you soon.